It started with a knock at the door, loud, aggressive, and way too early for a Saturday. My wife opened it, thinking it was a delivery or maybe a neighbor needing help. Instead, it was two so-called HOA enforcers wearing badges they printed at home and attitudes like they owned the block. Without even introducing themselves, they started yelling about a code violation, something about the garden beds being too close to the sidewalk. Never mind that we've had them for years, and the HOA never said a word until now. When my wife asked for clarification, one of them stepped forward and shoved a paper into her chest. She stepped back, startled, and that's when one of them got physical. I was inside, hearing the tone shift, but the moment I saw him grab her wrist, I lost it. They had no idea who they were dealing with. See, I'm not just a homeowner. I've got a background that's a little more serious than trimming hedges and attending HOA meetings. These guys thought they could scare us into compliance. They thought barking threats and throwing weight around would work like it probably had on others. But not this time. What happened next changed everything: the neighborhood, the HOA board, and the entire way these enforcers operated. You're going to want to stick around for this one, because I reminded them exactly who the hell I am. And they weren't ready for it. The second I stepped out onto the porch, the air shifted. The taller one clipboard instantly backed off. But the other one kept his grip on my wife's arm just a second too long. That was his first mistake. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just looked him square in the eye and asked for his name. He gave me some nonsense like HOA Enforcement Field Officer, not a real title, not a real job. But I already knew that. What I didn't know yet was who sent them. My wife, still shaken, stepped behind me while I asked for ID credentials, anything official. All they had was a printed notice and a list of infractions that included things like non-neutral flower colors and unapproved patio furniture. Absolute nonsense. But this wasn't really about code violations, it was personal. Our family moved into the neighborhood a year ago. I'm a vet, worked with federal security for over a decade, and we tend to keep to ourselves. That didn't sit well with the HOA president Karen, of course, who seemed to think we didn't fit her little picture-perfect vision for the community. We didn't attend her HOA meetings. We didn't decorate our lawn like everyone else. And apparently, that meant we were trouble. But sending two untrained men to intimidate my wife? That crossed a line. And now, it wasn't just about flower beds or chairs. It was about respect and reminding folks that we weren't the ones to mess with. After they left muttering something about filing a report with the board, my wife and I sat down and took a hard look at the papers they dropped. It wasn't just a citation. It was a formal notice of HOA violation stacked with false claims. They'd marked us for noncompliance, attempted fines, and even physical aggression. Which was ironic, considering they were the ones who got physical. I knew this wasn't random. This was targeted. Karen had it out for us since day one. It started small passive-aggressive notes about our American flag being too large. Complaints about the kids' bikes being visible in the driveway. We brushed it off, thinking she'd get bored and move on. Instead, she escalated. We weren't blending in, and that made us a threat to her little HOA kingdom. The weird part? I'd heard whispers from other neighbors. One guy down the block said he got fined for leaving his garage door open too long. Another family had their garden dug up for being too wild. It was always the same script, Harris. Fine, threaten, repeat. A few even moved out quietly, tired of the stress. Now it was our turn in her crosshairs. But what Karen didn't realize was that I wasn't built to be pushed. I don't scare easy, and I definitely don't fold under pressure. I decided to dig deeper, not just into the bogus violations, but into the HOA itself. Who's really behind these rules? Where's the money going? And what else has Karen been hiding behind those committee meetings? I started going through public records, HOA meeting minutes, and budget filings. What I found didn't just confirm my suspicions, it blew them wide open. The HOA had been issuing citations with inflated fines and questionable enforcement tactics. For months, most of the money collected wasn't being used for neighborhood repairs or maintenance. It was getting funneled into something labeled administrative stipends and committee development. Translation: Karen and her inner circle were paying themselves. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. One of the so-called enforcers, who showed up at my door, not even a resident. He was Karen's nephew, hired as security consultant and paid through HOA funds. No background check, no qualifications. Just someone willing to intimidate families for extra cash. I brought this to a few neighbors I trusted, folks who'd also been targeted but were too afraid to speak up. They couldn't believe how much had been hidden in plain sight. Late-night emergency meetings, rule changes pushed through without a vote, and selective enforcement that always seemed to fall on families who didn't fall in line. Tensions in the neighborhood started rising. People were whispering more openly, asking questions at the park, comparing notes. Something was shifting. Karen could feel it too. I saw her watching us from her porch, sunglasses on, phone in hand. But what she didn't know was that I had already filed a formal complaint with the county, and I was planning to show up at the next HOA meeting with evidence, witnesses, and a whole lot of backup. The day before the HOA meeting, I got an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper warning. It read, "Back off or you'll regret it." No signature, just typed words and a faint watermark from the HOA letterhead. That's when I knew I'd struck a nerve. Someone wasn't just nervous, they were desperate. I showed it to my wife, and her face went pale. "You think Karen's behind this?" she asked. Honestly, I didn't know. It could have been Karen, or it could have been someone else in her little circle of HOA loyalists, people with a lot to lose if the truth got out. What rattled me most was how bold they were getting. First, the enforcers, now threats. This wasn't about code violations anymore. This was control plain and simple. But the real twist came later that night. One of the neighbors I'd spoken with earlier, a quiet guy named Mark who never got involved in HOA drama, knocked on my door. He looked nervous, kept glancing over his shoulder. "I think you should see this," he said, holding up a USB drive. "I used to help Karen with her computer stuff. I saved some files, just in case." We plugged it in. What we found: private emails, fake fine templates, even audio recordings from private home stuff that should never exist. Karen hadn't just broken HOA rules, she'd crossed legal lines. And tomorrow's meeting, it wasn't going to be just a discussion. It was going to be a reckoning. The HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread fast, and nearly every homeowner showed up, some out of curiosity, others clearly fed up with the constant fines and intimidation. Karen sat at the front, smug as ever, flipping through her notes like she already had the outcome decided. But she didn't know I had the USB, or what was coming next. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't waste time. I plugged a laptop into the projector and said, "I think everyone deserves to know how our HOA has really been operating." The room fell silent. First came the email's proof that fines were being made up and selectively enforced. Then came the audio files recordings from backyard conversations captured without consent. Karen's face went from pink to ghost white. She stood up, trying to shut it down, shouting something about privacy violations, but it was too late. One neighbor shouted, "You spied on my family." Another demanded she resign. Chaos broke out as people yelled, some crying, some furious. Then the final twist. I pulled out my badge and calmly said, "For those wondering, Yasim, the county's police chief." And this evidence? It's already with the DA. Karen didn't speak another word. Security escorted her out as the crowd watched in stunned silence. But just before the room cleared, I noticed Mark, the quiet neighbor, slip out without saying anything. He'd given me the evidence. But now he was gone. And something told me he still had more secrets. A week later, the HOA board held an emergency election. With Karen removed and several others resigning under pressure, the entire neighborhood had a chance to start over. Folks who once stayed quiet stepped up. We voted in new leadership, real neighbors who cared more about community than control. My wife was asked to join the board, and despite everything, she agreed. She said, if we don't change it ourselves, we'll just keep repeating the mess. As for Mark, I caught up with him at the diner 2 towns over. He admitted he used to work in compliance, but left after seeing how people in power abused small rules for big gains. He'd moved to our neighborhood hoping for peace, but couldn't stay silent once he saw Karen targeting families like mine. He handed me one last folder just in case the HOA tried anything shady again. The ranch is quiet now. No patrols, no surprise inspections, no random fines showing up in the mailbox. Neighbors wave when they pass. Kids ride bikes without fear. Someone will call security. We host bonfires again, and the laughter feels louder, more honest.